Welcome or welcome back to the Cellular Agriculture Starter Culture, so CASC. Hello again, my name is Aida. I am here from CELAC, and today we will be talking about sustainability in the cellular agriculture products. This will be the last session held in English. Yes, and as you can see, today we invited Professor Hanna Tuomisto from the University of Helsinki and the Natural Resources Institute of Finland, as well as Pelle Sinke from the CE Delft. Both are very expertised in the life cycle analysis. So Pelle offers independent, or CE Delft offers independent research and consultancy, and his expertise is in the LCA analysis, as well as the food production, feedstock cycles, and the innovative technology, as well as product design. So we'll be happy to hear his talk first. And after that, we will hear a talk from Hanna Tuomisto, who is also expertise in the LCL analysis, as well as sustainable farming system, carbon footprint, as well as novel foods and CELAC products. So Pelle, if you would like to start and share your screen, you're happy to finish. For all of the participants, please feel free to write any questions that appear in the Q&A function, and we will get to them after both talks. Hello, Pelle.
Thank you, Saida. And good evening, everyone. I will share my screen. 1 second. I think I cannot share as long as you are sharing, Saida. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, good evening. My name is Pelle Sinke. I work at CE Delft, which is a not-for-profit consultancy based in the Netherlands, in Delft. And I've been working for around 5 years now in LCA of cultivated meat. So today I will share some key insights of the most recent public study that we published, because not all were public. And also I will compare our study to other sources in literature to get a more broader view of actually the state of sustainability of cultivated meat industry. CE Delft, where I work here, you see the building. It's a company based in Delft, near the coast in the Netherlands. And it's an independent research and consultancy firm for around 45 years, focused on sustainability. Started off in the energy area, and now it's around 85 people working on energy, agriculture, but also product chains and transport. And we are not for profit, but we work on a project basis for industries, governments, and NGOs. And for cultivated meat, I've been working for, well, both industries and NGOs actually, and governments not yet. The questions are not yet coming. I think it is important, though, for governments to start asking questions: what role cultivated meat can play in the future food system. So I also give some pointers for that in this presentation. Well, my experience with cultivated meat, it focused mostly on LCA from cradle to gate, as it is called. So we look at the point where a cultivated meat product leaves the facility, the cultivated meat facility, and it does not include the transport to consumer or cooking, etc. But we've done this for multiple organizations, and the one that I will be talking about today is the second bullet here, and it was a sort of an industry LCA started off 4 years ago, and we tried to make an assessment of sort of an average cultivated meat product. And the way I'm talking about it now already says that it's quite difficult, because of course there are many different technologies in cultivated meat and many different skills at what the process can be operating in the future. But yeah, since then the questions kept on coming, and we've also done LCAs for various companies, among whom Aleph Farms now already working for 4 years for them to provide LCA advice while they scale up and develop. And also interesting is currently we're working on a true cost analysis, in which LCA is a part, but we also look at broader cost aspects and environmental cost aspects. I will start with the study that we published 2 years ago, and go into some details there. Then I will zoom out a little bit and look at the other literature, among which, of course, a couple of publications by Professor Tuomisto. And I will close up with some final remarks about the value of LCA for society and for sustainable cultivated meat and protein. So when you're talking about cultivated meat and proteins in general, and you talk about environmental footprint, then quickly you arrive at LCA. LCA is a method to systemically assess production systems. And with that method, you can also compare, for example, 1 kilogram of protein delivered by cultivated meat to 1 kilogram of protein delivered by conventional beef cattle, for example, or 1 kilogram of tofu or beans. You can also include in the comparison. So if you want to say something about the environmental footprint of cultivated meat, of course, you do that in comparison, right? Is it more sustainable or less sustainable than something else that you would be eating? So that's what we are using life cycle assessment for. And explicitly, this does not say anything about animal welfare, for example, or consumer health. Those can be assessed using other methods. In a nutshell, cultivated meat, I think most of you know how this is produced, but what we're looking at in life cycle assessment is the production process that is shown here. First, a cell is taken from animals and that is grown in a bioreactor. And depending on the final product that needs to be made, various types of bioreactors can be included. Of course, these cells need to be fed certain nutrients, and that is also included in the LCA. So where are these nutrients coming from? What crops are used to make, for example, the sugars that go into the bioreactor, and what production steps are needed in between. So all of that is included in this picture, and the same, of course, goes for conventional meat, where you also look from the cradle to the moment that the meat leaves the slaughterhouse. In this study, we made a projection for 2030, because currently it's mostly lab scale and some are already going towards pilot scale, but it's very small scale. And if you want to say something about the environmental comparison between conventional meat and cultivated meat, you need to sort of compare apples to apples, and it means a mature technology. For that, we needed to make estimates for 2030. And we also included energy scenarios for that. So on the left hand, you see the global average energy mix by then, published by the International Energy Agency. And on the right-hand side, you see a fully renewable mix, which we implemented either at the facility of cultivated meat or also in the supply chain. Besides that, we also talked to many experts from companies and got data from them that represented projections of scaled up production processes, because we couldn't use the data that they currently have about their lab scale data directly, of course. So we also made culture medium scenarios based on that, because different things were said about that, depending on the company, depending on the technology, on the cells, etc. So we defined 3 media scenarios, which you will see in the graphs: a low, baseline, and high. And that yielded a carbon footprint. In blue here, you see cultivated meat. So you see on the left-hand side, the cultivated meat carbon footprint results for 1 kilogram if renewable energy is implemented at the facility, but also in the supply chain. Here you see the results for cultivated meat with renewable energy at the facility, but just an average mix in the supply chain. And on the right, you see the cultivated meat with global average energy also at the facility. And you see immediately that it makes a lot of difference which energy mix is put into the process, what the results are on the carbon footprint. And that is because cultivated meat and its supply chain are pretty dependent on industrial energy that is put into it. In green, you see the products that we compared to. On the right-hand side, very high, you see beef, both from beef cattle and dairy cattle, and then pork, and then chicken, and on the left, tofu, which has the lowest carbon footprint. And the dark green bars were the production scenarios that we made for conventional meat that represent improved production in 2030. So also for conventional meat, we look towards 2030 and projected more improvements, although the expected improvements there are less than in cultivated meat because the technology is already very mature. If you look at current production, it's the striped green bar, and the dotted green bar is sort of a global average for a couple of years ago. And I think the main conclusion here is that it depends very much which energy you put into it, how it compares to pork and chicken, especially. How it compares to beef is more clear because beef just has a very high carbon footprint. But if you are a producer of cultivated meat and you want to be more sustainable than chicken or pork, then it's really adamant that you have renewable energy. The cultivated meat uses more energy, but it's also because they actually replace the body of the animal, so to speak. That body needs to be kept warm. So that's the bioreactor. It needs to be kept warm, but it also needs to be cooled when the cells are too active or are very active. When you use electricity for that, you don't need the feed that animals usually use to keep their body at temperature and get their energy from. So that's what you see here. Actually, cultivated meat needs less feed because that is replaced by energy. And that also means that you need less land for cultivated meat than for all other animals. For water use, that's a different story because you need water to grow the crops, but you also need a lot of water in the supply chain of cultivated meat to transform the sugar crops into glucose, which can be used by the cells, for example. So water use is actually quite high in cultivated meat. The cumulative energy demand is sort of a metric that says how much energy you need throughout the supply chain. And that is highest in cultivated meat, as we found in our study, but that also in other studies, it is also a metric that comes out quite high. On the other hand, on the right side, you see acidification. And I took that indicator as an example. Acidification means the acidification of soils. And that is for a large part caused by ammonia that is released into the air and then next rains down on the soils. And it sort of acidifies your soils in nature and in agriculture. So this is a metric for mainly ammonia that is released during the production in the supply chain. And cultivated meat is more efficient in crops, that's A, and B is a contained production system, so you don't have manure, and manure is where a lot of the ammonia is released. So that's why you see that the environmental impact of cultivated meat on this indicator, but also on other indicators related to ammonia is very low. And that is actually good news for biodiversity, as we have, as you see in the Netherlands, where there's a nitrogen crisis, as they call it, at this moment. The feed conversion, what I was referring to, you can see it here. Well, when you cut out the middleman or animal, so to speak, and you replace it by a bioreactor, you see that actually in our study, you can cut down the efficiency of feed to meat by a factor 2 compared to chicken, and even more compared to pork and beef. It's not as efficient as tofu or even more so beans. Beans have a feed conversion efficiency of 1 because you eat them directly. But it's twice as efficient as chicken. which is, of course, a great gain. Following this, you can actually say that you electrify meat production when you switch to cultivated meat, but it also goes for example, precision fermentation, what Professor Tuomisto will be talking about. You need less food, but you need more energy, and then you electrify basically, because a lot of this energy comes from electricity. And electricity can be made renewable, and then you have a low carbon footprint, but it can also come from fossil sources, and then you have a high carbon footprint. I think that's sort of the core message for this technology. If you want to be sustainable, use renewable energy. And for chicken and pork and beef, it's much harder to sort of remove the greenhouse gases from the supply chain, because they are inherent to biological processes, such as methane from fermentation in cattle. So we have a trade-off here. You need more energy for production, but you need less land because you need less feed. So I think if you zoom out a little bit, it's interesting to ask yourself the question: what can be done with this land? Can you produce more food? Can you maybe make conventional animal production more extensive, so it has a lower environmental impact? Or can you produce renewable energy on this land, or actually rewild it and have more nature again? And that's interesting for policymakers to see, if you're in a protein transition, what is your vision of the future? Yeah, so the conclusions are there are clear advantages regarding land use and ammonia and nitrogen related impacts due to the improved feed conversion efficiency, and that is good news for biodiversity. There is, however, higher energy use, and therefore the carbon footprint is a point of attention if you don't have renewable energy. And it's not a given that there is enough renewable energy, or that it will be sourced, because we're in an energy transition, of course, and everybody wants renewable energy. So I think it's not, it shouldn't be assumed that there will be just enough, and companies should also have their own responsibility in ensuring there's enough renewable energy. For policy, I think that the cultivated meat is one ingredient in a broader protein transition that can really transform food systems. So it's important for them to already start asking questions. How do you want the future to look like, and what technologies can be included in that? And of course, the energy system and energy production is also a policy aspect. For industry, well, there's both efficiency and there is sourcing that can be leveraged to reduce the carbon footprint or environmental footprint of cultivated meat. And it goes for both energy, but also for the culture medium and their ingredients. And there, I think in culture medium, one of the challenges is to switch from high impact ingredients, sometimes coming still from pharma production practices, switch to low impact ingredients that come more from feed or food industry. Then I zoom out a little bit and look at our study and how that relates to other published studies. First, to focus on the peer-reviewed publications, and a couple of these are from Professor Tuomisto, who will be going on after me, of course. And what you see is that the first study was published in 2011 already, 13 years ago. And well, since then, the carbon footprints have been increasing a little bit, and that's both because of more accurate estimates, I think, for energy consumption in the process itself and in the supply chain, but also because of more detailed modeling of energy mixes, maybe. And if you see then here, we have explicitly included an ambitious benchmark, which has renewable energy both at the facility but also in the supply chain. And that's one way actually that the carbon footprint can be reduced to a large extent. And I think that's important in future assessments as well, to highlight, what can this mean for the carbon footprint of your product, which energy mix is in it. You see on the left here energy use estimates. Well, again, they have been increasing, and it's important to note here as well that these studies do not look at the exact same production system or scale, of course. So also in cultivated meat, more and more you see different companies taking different routes to their final product, different production platforms and different stages of maturity of the product, for example. And that is that has a large influence on the energy use as well. And land use also varies up and down a bit, but I think land use is especially interesting to see in comparison to conventional meat production, and often case that is still much higher. Here you see the facility energy use that we modeled, but also in comparison to different studies. I think important to note here is that there is still considerable uncertainty what the energy profile of a production process at scale will look like, because there's simply not yet a cultivated meat facility at scale available. So for example, to what extent will cooling the process will be needed? The cells do not produce a lot of heat by themselves, but if you scale it up and you have high cell densities and you have very large bioreactors, well, it might be that you need quite some cooling load standby. Also, I think one that is varying a lot is the assumptions for the production environment where it takes place. If it's in a pharma grade facility, then you will see very high HVAC, which is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, for example, for air filtration and refreshment. So this will be very high if you have a pharma grade facility, but if you have a food grade facility, that will be much lower. So those are things that well still need to be defined, I think, when companies scale up, and it will be interesting to take a good look at these when companies publish values for this. This I will not go into much detail, but this is the feed conversion and basically the carbon sources used for the cells accumulation. And the right column is interesting, I think, as if you approach a carbon conversion ratio of around 50, which you see here in our mid-medium scenario and in the most recent study by Professor Tuomisto in the CMB 128 scenario. So if you approach 0.5, then it's a quite efficient process and roughly twice as efficient as industrial chicken production. So to close off, a few notes on leveraging LCA for sustainable cultivated meat, but also for the broader protein transition. I want to repeat the message that it's not a given that there will be that cultivated meat will be more sustainable because energy is so important, and the energy mix. And it also goes if you of course culture medium efficiency is also important, but also for that you see in the supply chain that which energy is used for the production of these ingredients is just very important. So as long as we do not have a net zero society with a zero emissions electricity, then it's not a given that cultivated meat is more sustainable, and companies need to have extra efforts to ensure they have renewable energy. And I think we are moving also a little bit towards a stage where there will be more data available slowly, because companies scale up and more defined sort of directions for technology are being developed. And that also means that there's also more room for tailored LCAs for specific companies. And well, that's what I also do for my work. But I've also heard that globally, many of the companies are actually making their own LCAs. And that's good news, because you can then define your own footprint and your own environmental hotspots and make decisions in that. And it's important to do that in very early stages of your technology, because, well, once the facility is there, once you have your large-scale production in place, it's very hard to change your production process, of course. So it's important to, at an early stage already, get involved in LCA. And this figure, well, it's one of my favorite figures, although I understand that it's very hard to read. But what it actually says is that if you are in very early stages of development, LCA is very valuable, but also very uncertain. But the information that you get from LCA can be used to change your process at relatively low cost. While if you do your LCA later, once you have your full-scale facility up and running, you have more certain data, but it's also very hard to change your process. You have all these lock-ins and you have this investment there. So this is sort of a sweet spot where we are now, where LCA or where cultivated meat companies are moving from prototype to pilot. And I think really now it's important to have your LCA in place and project towards the future what the impact of your product can be and how you can reduce this impact. But there are also some limitations about the LCAs as we do them now. And that is, as I said before, there's many different technologies. So your LCA can easily be interpreted as what is the impact of cultivated meat, but there is no one type of cultivated meat. So we need more diversity in LCAs. And besides that, we also, especially once companies start doing their own LCAs, we need a harmonized methodology that actually gives you guidance on important factors of the LCA, so you can compare the LCAs after you have done them. So about system boundaries or about the functional unit or impact assessment methods, etc. I think it's very important that we get towards a point that this is the same between all LCAs that will be carried out. For example, in renewable energy, it took quite a long time for some renewable energy technologies to have these kinds of rules for the sector. And then it's very confusing in the public debate, and you have to retrace and do studies again. Yeah. So I want to highlight that here. And LCA is an ingredient, I think, in broader studies. So for policy, when you're looking at land use versus energy trade-off, LCA is an ingredient, but you need more, of course. You need more information, you need different perspectives. Also, you need, of course, to consider aspects in future scenarios that are not directly coming from LCA, but can be combined with LCA. For example, farmer livelihoods, also a business case can be calculated and combined with an LCA. And that's actually what we are doing right now for a Dutch organization together with Wageningen Economic Research. We're doing a true cost assessment, which includes a business case, but also LCA and also animal welfare in one environmental business case, so to speak. So that's that can actually give you added insights beyond LCA. And then well, very important and a bridge to the talk of Professor Tuomisto is that finally cultivated meat is just one ingredient, of course, in the protein transition. So you also need good information and good data on conventional animal agriculture, but also on the other pillars of the protein transition, which are plant-based and fermentation. And these can be combined in different scenarios that fit well, certain regions or certain tastes. Yeah. Thank you very much. That's it for now. I think the questions come at the end after the talk of Professor Tuomisto, who will be now going into precision fermentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Pelle, for really excellent presentation and also very good intro for my presentation. So I will share my presentation here. So I'm Hanna Tuomisto from the University of Helsinki and the Natural Resources Institute Finland. I'm a professor in sustainable food systems, and today I'm going to focus on the environmental impacts of precision fermented proteins and specifically milk and egg white proteins. But before I go to that, I will give a little bit background about the environmental impacts of agriculture and food production. So it may be quite surprising to many that agriculture is actually the main driver of many environmental impacts. So here you see the planetary boundaries, and agriculture is contributing more than 80% to many of these environmental impacts, and many of these have already exceeded the planetary boundaries, like the biodiversity losses, land system change, freshwater use, and phosphorus and nitrogen flows. For climate change, agriculture is contributing alone about 20%, but then when we look at the whole food systems, it's about 1/3 of all human-induced greenhouse gas emissions. And there was an update of these planetary boundaries recently, and now we can see that many of these planetary boundaries have exceeded the safe limits. So this is just for your information here. So yeah, food systems as a whole contribute about 1/3 of all human-induced greenhouse gas emissions, and livestock production about 20% of all human-induced greenhouse gas emissions. So most of the food system emissions are coming from livestock production. And here, when we look at the carbon footprint or the greenhouse gas emissions of different foods, livestock products, and especially beef and lamb, because they are ruminants, they are producing methane, which is also a greenhouse gas as a part of the digestion process of feed. They have the highest carbon footprint of all foods, and also when compared to other livestock products. And then there are different livestock products. Rice has a quite high impact as well, and then the plant-based foods have the lowest impacts. And then when we look at the total climate impact of different foods, when we also take into account the consumption, beef has the highest impact, and then actually rice is the second one because of the high consumption of rice globally. And then cow milk is the third biggest. And then, okay, wheat is also quite high, but then other livestock meat products. And here is then just a comparison of the environmental impacts of dairy milk versus soybean-based drink. So here you can see that the soya, these plant-based drinks have much lower environmental impact compared to milk. And then to cellular agriculture, I will introduce some terms here. So cellular agriculture can be divided to two different groups based on what type of process is used. So the cellular products are products that consist of the cells that have been cultivated, and here cultivated meat is the one most commonly known example, but then also different non-food products can be produced, like leather, fur, wood, and then, yeah, of course, offal as well, that can be used for food or also for pet food. And then acellular products are products that are synthesized by the cells that have been cultivated. So here, oftenly the microbes are genetically modified to synthesize certain products like caseins, which is milk protein, or other milk proteins as well, like whey proteins can be produced. Gelatin, vanillin, also fatty acids can be produced by using this precision fermentation methods, and then ovalbumin, which is the egg white. But then also these cell culturing processes can be produced, or can be divided based on what is the source of carbon. So the cells can, most of them use carbohydrates as a source of carbon. So they need some source of glucose, for example, from maize or sugar beet or sugar cane. But then there are also these kind of gas fermented organisms that are able to use carbon dioxide or methane gas as a source of carbon. And these are interesting because they don't require any agricultural land for the production. These gas fermented microbes can also be genetically modified so that they can produce these milk proteins and egg proteins, for example. And yeah, I will talk about these life cycle assessments of the ovalbumin and the milk proteins in a little bit. But first, just to tell a little bit background about life cycle assessment. So it's method that estimates the environmental impacts of a product along the whole life cycle. So it actually starts from the extraction of resources from the mining, and includes the primary production of all the inputs, also production of energy, processing. Then it can also include retail consumption and waste management. Waste is produced in all of these parts of the life cycle, so waste is always included. But often when we are interested in only looking at different ways of producing some food, we may end the life cycle to the processing part, or the primary production part. So it's not always necessary to look at the whole life cycle. It depends on what is important for the aims of the project. The life cycle assessment method is standardized by the International Organization for Standardization, ISO. But these ISO standards still give quite a lot of freedom. And even though a study has been done by using ISO standards, it doesn't mean that it is possible to compare directly two different studies. For example, if two different companies have been doing the LCA for the same product. So that's why the European Commission started this kind of environmental footprint project that aims at developing very detailed guidelines for companies how to do a life cycle assessment, so that it is actually possible to compare the results from different companies. And there is also guidelines for how to communicate the results of these assessments. But this European Commission's environmental footprint project is still running, and there are these kind of generic guidelines that cover all the products available on the website. But then these kind of specific guidelines for different product groups have been only developed for some product categories, but then they are being all the time developed more. But this could be something that might become in the future a requirement in the green claims of European Union regulation, that when companies report their environmental impact, they have to use this method. At the moment, the regulation says that it needs to be life cycle assessment based, the method that has been used, but it still doesn't refer to this product environmental footprint method. So in precision fermentation, when we do a life cycle assessment, the important part to consider is the allocation, how the environmental impacts are allocated between the main product, so the target protein, like casein or heme protein or of albumin or the fatty acids. So these are extracted from the bioreactor so that it's as pure product as possible, because the microbial biomass generally is genetically modified. So then in Europe, it's not possible to use at the moment this microbial biomass that produces these proteins or fatty acids as food. But then in the US, it is possible to use it as at least pet food. So in Europe, at the moment, it would most likely be used for energy production. But how to allocate the impacts between the target product and the microbial biomass has a big impact on the results I will show in a little bit. So the first study here is a life cycle assessment of ovalbumin, which is the egg white protein, and this is produced by Trichoderma rhesae microfungus. And here the system boundaries are from the production of the raw materials, extraction of the raw materials, including all the cell culturing processes, cleaning of the bioreactor, and also the spray drying, but then further processes like packaging, etc., are not included. And so here we compared the environmental impacts with the chicken egg produced in Germany and in Poland. We selected these countries because we, or because of the energy uses and because we had data for the chicken egg LCAs for these countries. But in both countries, the global warming potential, the carbon footprint, land use, as well as the cumulative energy demand were lower compared to chicken egg production. But then we compared the different countries and also different sources of electricity. So here we have also Finland. So here the idea was that Finland is an example of a country that has quite clean, or let's say low emission electricity mix. And then Germany was something in the middle, and Poland was then a country that has high emissions from electricity. And then we created this kind of low carbon electricity model for Finland, where we removed all the fossil electricity from the electricity mix, but it still has nuclear power as well. But with this low emission electricity mix, we got really we got the lowest carbon footprint for the ovalbumin, and most of the other environmental impacts were low, or at least at the same level with other options, except the ionizing radiation was the highest in this low carbon electricity mix, because of the nuclear power had then higher role in there. Oh, and then yeah, here you also see where the environmental impacts of the precision fermented or recombinant ovalbumin production mainly came from. So most of the impacts came from the production of the glucose. So this yellow, especially for land use, the glucose production is high, and also for water scarcity. And then the electricity use for the actual production, the cell culturing and the filtration and purification processes is this violet. So then that was also one of the main contributors. And for what some impacts, the salt mix also had, or at least for the water footprint, it had quite high contribution to the results. And then the next study is a life cycle assessment for milk protein, beta-lactoglobulin, so the whey protein, and this was also produced with the Trichoderma rhesae. This study is from the VTT Technological Research Institute in Finland. And in this study, the system boundaries were similar to this ovalbumin study. They had two scenarios. The first scenario produced 90% purity for the protein, and then they had in some scenarios this kind of extra purification steps so that the purity was 95% for the protein. And then they also compared different carbon sources. So there was in some of the scenarios, or in one of the scenarios, in the scenario 2, there was sucrose. The other scenarios here had glucose as a carbon source. Then they had differences how the fungal biomass or the microbial biomass was used, if it was used for, or in most cases it was used for feed, but then in the third scenario it was assumed that it's waste, and then all other scenarios had the 90% product purity, but then this fourth scenario had 95% purity. And then here you can see the differences based on where the production takes place. So there was New Zealand, Germany, US, Alabama, and US, Victoria. So here the differences come from the electricity mix. When we look at the carbon footprint, there were also differences here. You can see like where the sucrose was coming from, if it was from sugar cane or sugar peat. But anyway, so the carbon footprint range was from 5.5 to 17.6 tons of CO2 equivalents per ton of protein, depending on the scenario. So here you can see that many different factors are affecting the environmental impact. And the carbon source, the production of the sucrose or the glucose, and then the electricity were also here the highest contributors to the environmental impacts. And then when the carbon footprint of those scenarios was compared with dairy milk. So here in the middle, you can see 3 scenarios for dairy protein production in New Zealand. So then actually only these scenarios where the production of the precision fermented milk protein was happening in New Zealand, and okay, one scenario in Germany had a lower impact compared to dairy milk. Here they actually allocated also this so that they really looked at only the dairy protein in this comparison. This is then another study for recombinant or precision fermented whey protein from the perfect day. And actually what this study shows is the difference, how much impact the allocation choice between the microbial biomass and the milk protein can have. So in this left side figure, they assumed that the microbial biomass is used for pet food, and they allocated based on the mass of the milk protein versus the mass of the microbial biomass that was left over from the process. And so only about a little bit over 20% was allocated to the milk protein, and almost 80% for the microbial biomass. So then the carbon footprint was only 2.7 kilograms of CO2 equivalents per kilogram of protein, whereas if they allocated 100% of the impact to the milk protein, then the carbon footprint was 12. But I would say that this kind of mass-based allocation is not a very preferable method. So often we use economic allocation, which would describe the economic value of the milk protein versus the microbial biomass. And so that is more reasonable in a way, because it reflects why the production process even takes place, because there might be other better ways of producing this pet food instead of using this complicated process. So but yeah, here you can see that the allocation has also just one choice in the method that has also a huge impact how the results will come out. This study from the VTT, they also looked at the water footprint of precision fermented milk production. And here you can also see these are the same scenarios than earlier. And here you can see also huge differences depending on where the production takes place. And this is this kind of water scarcity based allocation method, which also describes the water scarcity in that area. So if 1 liter of water is used in a water scarce area, then the water scarcity footprint impact can be close to 100. Whereas if it's used some place that has plenty of water, then it's around 1. So then this is also something to consider when you compare the water footprint results, that how much importance the location can have. So then you need to be careful when you compare different studies if the difference comes actually from the product or the production process, or if it comes from the location where some of the ingredients were produced. And so this shows the comparison of the water footprint of this precision fermented milk. So these bars are the different scenarios for precision fermented milk. And then here, these lines show different scenarios for water footprint of dairy protein produced in New Zealand. And here you can see also a huge difference between if the pastures have been irrigated or not. So if it's irrigated, then the water footprint is really huge. But otherwise, the water footprint of the dairy production is relatively low. And some of the scenarios of the precision fermented milk have lower water footprint, but not all. This is a comparison that I made based on a paper that we published earlier. So then I compared the environmental impacts of different types of dairy milk alternatives. So the black bar is normal dairy milk, and then the next, the gray bar is cultivated milk that contains 3% precision fermented milk protein, and then oat drink as a basis that contains oats and rapeseed oil. And compared to the dairy milk, this precision fermented milk had, or cultured milk had less than a half of the carbon footprint. The water footprint was about at the same level with dairy, and land use was about 20% of the dairy milk. And then these plant-based drinks had huge variation depending what is the source, if it's soya, oats, or almond and rice, because almond and rice had the highest carbon footprint, and water footprint especially was really high for those almond and rice, and also land use was higher compared to the oat drink. But still, the oat drink had the lowest impact in all of these 3 environmental impact categories. And yeah, here, just for your information, also a comparison with different cell cultured foods. So the recombinant proteins in the protein bases. So in this figure, I compared the environmental impacts of recombinant proteins with this CASC fermented microbes and cultured meat per unit of protein, and then also peas from the plant side, dairy milk, eggs, poultry, and beef. So the recombinant proteins had a really low land use. Only the CASC fermented microbes had lower. And then also carbon footprint, it depends, of course, on the source of energy. But then the energy use was relatively high. So the cumulative energy use was higher compared to some of the, or at least the plant-based foods and poultry, and at similar level with eggs. So, but then compared to beef, yeah, beef is really high. Only cultivated meat, some of the scenarios had even higher cumulative energy use than beef production. Yeah, so maybe I will go just quickly the last slide. So then, of course, when we want to understand the sustainability of these precision fermented proteins and other alternative proteins and food systems as a whole, we need to also consider other things than just comparing products alone. So we need to think about the food production and consumption, how many people will be willing to use these products. So of course we will not reach any environmental benefits unless a large proportion of consumers will start to consume these products. And we need to think about how they will be incorporated in meals and diets as well. We need to think about also the other commodities. Livestock production produces many other commodities as well, non-food materials that would need to be replaced with some other ways. So we would need to look at how we can then produce those in alternative ways and what the environmental impacts of that would be. We need to think about the land use, what happens to all of the pasture lands, for example, that may not be possible to be used for arable crop production, and what kind of land uses will happen as a consequence of the food system transition. Can we grow more forest or reduce deforestation? And then energy production. So as these studies show, the source of energy and especially electricity is important. So how can we produce enough sustainable electricity? And then the environmental changes. So we would need to also consider how these cell-cultured food production technologies could help us to adapt to environmental changes like climate change. And so my group has done quite a bit of work of these. I will show these. There are references and you can look into the papers, but I will not go through this in detail. But we looked at how these novel foods could be incorporated in meals. So we looked at the nutritionally balanced meals and changed the protein source, including also precision fermented ovalbumin, cultivated meat, microbial proteins, mycoproteins, for instance. And then we also looked at can we build nutritionally balanced diets by using these novel food ingredients in the diets. And this is an optimization study where we found that if we optimize the diets, it is possible to build nutritionally balanced diets with these novel foods, but there were some nutrients like vitamin D and B12 that we had to remove because those were hard to get without supplements. And then we also looked at the issue of these non-food byproducts from livestock production by comparing if we replace everything what a dairy cattle production system produces with alternative protein sources. So either using beef cattle that doesn't produce milk at all, and then substituting the milk with oat drink, and then the byproducts like leather and pet food with alternative ways like artificial leather and alternative pet food and feed products. And then same with just replacing the meat with pork, cultivated meat, and tofu. And actually we found that all of these alternative scenarios had lower impact compared to the dairy cattle when they produce the same amount of outputs. Then we are also looking into how we can design farming systems so that the agriculture is still using sustainable agriculture practices with versatile crop rotations. It's important to include grass in many of the crop rotations. It's good for the soil, but if we don't have cattle, what will we do with the grass? So we can produce biogas in anaerobic digesters that then produce energy that could be used for cellular agriculture production, or then actually grass can also produce amino acids that could be used in cultivated meat production. So we need to also think about how the farming will be still sustainable, and we are not just switching to monocropping crops for glucose production. Also, of course, legumes can be included in the crop rotations to get the amino acids for cultivated meat production if we switch to cellular agriculture. And then finally, a recent paper that my research group published this year, we did this kind of global assessment of looking at different scenarios of replacing livestock protein with microbial proteins and precision fermented proteins globally by 0 to 100% by 2050. And then we looked at what happens to greenhouse gas emissions, land use, and also rare earth materials like metals, and also phosphorus was included. And we found that 100% replacement of livestock protein with cell cultivated proteins, when we assumed that they would be produced by using wind or solar energy, would reduce the agricultural greenhouse gas emissions to half, and phosphorus use by half. Agricultural land use would be reduced by 80%. We would require about 1/3 of renewable energy production capacity. But yeah, the demand of rare earth metals would increase, but only tellurium that is used for solar panels, the demand would increase the production capacity. But yeah, these are things that we need to also think about, because of course the demand of renewable electricity is increasing in all other sectors as well, than not only at the food sector. So how we have enough resources and the capacity to facilitate this transition in food systems. And then the conclusion: so precision fermented proteins have the potential to have lower environmental impacts compared to livestock proteins, and the main contributing factors are the production of the carbon source, and then the energy use. So it's important to use these low emission energy and carbon sources. Then how we use the microbial biomass that is produced as a leftover of the precision fermentation process, that has a huge impact on the environmental impact results and how the allocation is done. And then, yeah, these methodological differences in life cycle assessment have a huge impact on the results. So we need to be careful when doing the comparisons, and also we need some standards, so standardized guidelines also for the cellular agriculture sector, how to do the life cycle assessments. And yeah, also good to remember that all of these technologies are still under development, and the current estimates of the sustainability impacts have really high uncertainties, and there is a lot of scope to reduce the impacts by developing these technologies. Yeah, thank you very much.